into it with a couple of questions. First, a fun one. So what's your favorite thing to do outside? First.
I laughed the other day at a meme one of my friends posted that said, "You know you're old when you're at the age that birds matter." And right now, I wake up to what I think is a painted bunting, and it makes me happy because I go outside with my little plants on my patio, and I try to look for the painted bunting. So right now, looking for birds. It's one of my favorite things to do.
That's awesome. I have a lot of ways I know I'm old, but birds is not yet one of them, so maybe I'm doing okay. I was thinking about this. I love being very active in nature. So biking, hiking, trail running, rock climbing. But I was actually thinking about my favorite kind of way of connecting with nature is actually through wildflowers. And I'm not just saying that. But I was excited for the serendipity of that. They just teach me a lot about beauty and resilience, even though they're temporary. And I just find a lot of joy and comfort in being among the wildflowers.
It's funny you say you love to be active, because I love the opposite of that. I love to be inactive in nature. And I know I'm getting old because now I refuse to go tent camping, and we have a pop-up camper. And I will never sleep on the, well, actually I did camp. I did some tent camping this year, but now I'm pop-up camper life. I'm like, you can plug a fan in when it's hot. So now I can go camping in summer in Texas, which I refused to before, but now I can live that life, and it feels very luxurious. My whole family loves it, and we're like, oh, we can stay here all week. Like, yeah, we can live here. So that's my favorite thing.
Excellent. So this is a question that all want to can answer. What are some of the barriers you've encountered when trying to get children to engage with nature, and does doing that work in Austin exacerbate or diminish those barriers?
You want to start us off? You're in Austin, I
Yeah.
think. I'm not in Austin.
Oh, but you're in the area. I think in Austin, well, I can only speak from my experience, right? And so I've worked mostly, pretty much only with children who live in the Eastern Crescent, which is East Austin, south to north. And I think one of the hardest things, most kids want to go outside and play sports. They want to go outside and play on the playground. But I think when it comes to doing things outside of what you typically are asking kids to do, there's like, oh, what? Why would I do that? That sounds scary or dangerous, or I don't know anybody else who does that. I have a lot of Black children be like, that's for white people. When we would talk about camping or hiking, what is hiking? Well, it's really just like walking outside. But so some of those things, and then, with the size of Austin, just the access to a trail or an area where you feel welcome or safe, or it's nice, you want to go, it's so hard to get there. So, I have 2 kids, and even the thought of going, I want them to experience Barton Springs, but the thought of getting to Barton Springs sometimes blocks me from getting there. So, access to just easily manageable trails and outdoor spaces, I think is a huge thing, but it's also, I could go on and on, but I'll stop. There's a lot of things, from bugs and allergies in the sun to institutional racism, stereotypes, not knowing what to do, not having the money to do it. So I think I've experienced all of those reasons, and that create barriers from getting kids outside.
Thank you. I agree. And I was thinking about, in my work as a social worker and as someone who identifies as white and has worked with a lot of BIPOC children, trying to get them outside, they've definitely said that to me, like, no, that's something you like to do. So that resonates. And but it's like a false assumption. It's that socialization that they've gotten where the outdoors is just as colonized of a place as higher education, right? I mean, it's like they will say things like, well, kids like me don't, and you can fill in the blanks. And those are false assumptions that they've been socialized to believe, right? Because the outdoors has been a space that like has been for white people who shop at REI, and it's not. And historically, and I loved your talk that you gave with the Texas Children of Nature Network, Starla, because you really provided a different narrative of the history of BIPOC people in the outdoors, which was very much reclaiming that. And I think that narrative has to get shared. I'll just speak from my knowledge as a licensed mental health professional and say that even though I'm here to talk about how being out in nature is so great for our mental health, one of the biggest barriers that I'm seeing for kids getting outside is their mental health. If they're struggling with anxiety or depression or PTSD, it can be, getting out of your comfort zone or expanding your comfort zone and doing things like you said, dealing with bugs and heat and, what is this food you're feeding me? I mean, everything, right, feels uncomfortable. And our central nervous system doesn't always know the difference, especially if we have a trauma history between discomfort and unsafety. And so I think mental health, even though it's like the reason we need to get outside, it's also a barrier. And so this video that Explore Austin just showed, the two words that jumped out at me were trust and belonging. Because we used to think that getting people outside meant, challenge, make them uncomfortable, now it's like, people are coming to us in a state of disequilibrium. We need to be nurturing and loving and create a sense of welcome and belonging in the outdoors. The challenge will follow, right? There's always mosquitoes. So anyway, I could also go on for a while, but I'm gonna turn it over to you, Dr. Fresco.
So I agree, but the way that I framed it in a conversation the other day is generational trauma is one of the barriers that keep, especially students of color, from coming outside. That in my childhood, my mom could tell me places that we couldn't go in East Texas. So those things of knowing that there are places that I couldn't go outside when I grew up on 10 plus acres, and the plus was because cousins owned the land next to us, so it was ours too, was like a foreign concept of like, I can't go somewhere. But growing up in a place where it was very relevant of not being able to go outside in certain places. And my experience working with students in inner city Title I schools, there is a fear of outside, and also that what you both have spoken to of not knowing. But I remember students telling me they didn't know what cricket sounded like, and it was a foreign concept to me that you didn't know what cricket sounded like. But being able to introduce those things to students in a way that was lowering those barriers was rewarding, but recognizing that those barriers were there. The fear of outside, because I don't know what is outside, and also feeling that outside wasn't for them unless they were playing a sport, unless it was on a football field or things like that. So when we talk about outside, not only lowering the barriers, but being able to see that the barriers are there, I think is probably one of the most impactful things for me to get people to come outside, to try to find that hook that's going to get over the barrier, is more what I focus on instead of the barriers themselves.
Wonderful. So you guys have gotten into some of the other questions that I had. So I'm going to change it up a little bit. So Starla, you talked a little bit about African Americans, Black folks seeing the outdoors as a non-Black space, when we know that that's not the case, especially since a number of African Americans have the rural South as their past or as their present. And so could you talk to us a little bit more about how you kind of frame that for folks, and whether you see that also as an environmental justice issue?
I also want to say that I also grew up in the country, and so I grew up thinking that the outdoors was definitely for Black folks, because all of my cousins spent time roaming around, but also there was that fear, because I grew up in Missouri, of very places that you absolutely cannot go, and so there's a lot to that. But I think there's a lot of Black families who have stories of grandparents, and then in the South, living on the land, being connected to the land, farming, fishing, doing all those things. But coming back to environmental justice and reclaiming space, I think in many ways, Indigenous people, brown people, Black people have been always reclaiming space. We've always been creating our own spaces to be safe, to practice the ways we connect to the land. That's for survival, for our health, for our spirits, in a lot of ways. And the history of environmental justice environmental justice is a movement that has been created and driven by communities of color. And so there is a space there already created to fight for the right to live in a healthy environment, to live toxic free, to live with clean water, clean air. And so, I think it's just important to think about the history of how communities of color have come together to take care of a need to survive that was not being taken care of by anyone else. And so that's very natural to do that, and that has been part of our history. And I think even now, there's been this movement more, not just to fight for clean air, clean water, to not live next to a waste management plant, but to also be able to enjoy, to connect, to relax in the outdoors and do it in a way that feels safe. I think, I'm a social worker, so I'm also always thinking of self-regulation and emotional safety. And just because there is a natural space that, says, oh, you're welcome to come here and come to this park, you're welcome, it's not against the law, doesn't necessarily mean that that place is for you, that you're gonna feel safe. And so reclaiming spaces, I think it's more about reclaiming safety and doing that in community. And then, I used to be an outdoor Afro leader, and so that's what that organization did. It was about changing the narrative and just being in community and taking up space together. And it's safe to do it when you are with people you feel safe with, that you can be really real with about what you're afraid of, that you can, you can engage in the way that you want, that you're driving your experience. And so I think that is part of environmental justice, because that's tied to our health. And I think that's what it comes back to. I can talk in circles, but it all really is all connected. And it all comes down to the right to have health and live a healthy life. And that is feeling safe and being able to enjoy and relax and drink clean water and do all of these things. And so I think that's what I kind of think about it as an environmental justice, how reclaiming these spaces, we've been doing it, it's necessary, and it is, I think it's just really beautiful too now to see so many different organizations led by people of color doing all sorts of things, like, farming collective, food collectives, mountain climbing, biking, in the water. There's just all these different ways. Surfing, yes. Yeah, so, and I think that helps to change the narrative, right? You want to see people out there it's part of carrying on that legacy and trying to heal some of that generational trauma.
People doing people things and not those people things.
Right. Yeah, just people things. Danica, you've worked with children, in particular children of color, throughout your career. What benefits have you observed when it comes to children spending time outdoors?
There are countless benefits. Most of them are socially emotional connections to things outside. That, in my experience of taking just students outside as a teacher, because I felt like anything that I could teach in four walls, I could teach outside. I saw that students wanted to come to class and wanted to pay attention because they knew going outside was a part of their schedule. And they would ask, when are we going outside? Or what are we gonna do when we go outside? And it's like, be calm, patient, we're gonna get there. So that it would take my inattentive student and make him an attentive student immediately, because going outside was something different, because was it in the video, 7 hours a day in a classroom, and seeing what that does to a student over time, especially the fidgety ones that are the ones that are getting in trouble in class. And it's like they're troublemakers, they just need to go outside. I think it's a Cat Williams joke that like talks about his son, and he's like, what are you thinking about? Running. Was the punchline of the joke, and it's like you see those kids in class, and you're like, yes, that's exactly what they're thinking about. Why not take them outside and go let them run for 5 minutes, and then come back and teach them something cool about outside. So the creativity in doing that and having it reflected back to you and a student is amazing, because outside is a great teacher. I taught science, so it was easy to go outside. I could teach physics, I could teach biology, I could teach those things outside pretty easily, but outside also gave them the opportunity to problem solve together, because they saw things happening in nature that they had wonderings about. So I was always asking questions, and then those questions would come back about, why is that? And I don't know, why is that? Can we go figure it out together? So it would lead into other questions. So the creativity, the ingenuity that came from kids from going outside, even if it was a structured time in a middle school classroom, because that's what I had most of my students in, was a middle school classroom, that even if it was just 15 minutes of our 45-minute block, because that's what we could fit in, made a huge impact on the way that they behaved and the way that they engaged into what was happening. And I even did that in a place where I wasn't supposed to, at least that's what I got told, and so I asked forgiveness and not permission sometimes, was in an alternative school and helped start a program, even if it was just taking those kids that were deemed the worst kids in all of the Metroplex outside for 20 minutes of their lunch break. It changed their behavior. And we had a blacktop that had no nature in it, if you wanted to see it that way. But being able to go outside improved their situation greatly.
Wonderful. And I guess that's when you're outside and people and kids are asking, why?
Yeah.
You like to hear that word, though.
Exactly. And even if the why didn't have an answer that I could give, it was like, let's go figure it out together.
Christine, you're a certified clinical adventure therapist. What does that work look like when you're engaging with kids, and what do you appreciate about that work most?
I'm smiling because I'm thinking about equating like sitting in a classroom to also like sitting in therapy, right? Like talk therapy for a child or an adolescent, or for some of us maybe up here, is not a developmentally appropriate modality a lot of times. And we know this. We think about art therapy, animal-assisted therapy, play therapy. If you want, you can think of outdoor adventure therapy as like play therapy for big kids, but in nature, because it's at its core, it's experiential, right? And so we say it is the prescriptive use of outdoor experiences to kinesthetically engage the client on affective, cognitive, and behavioral levels. It's a holistic modality of treatment. So yes, there's talking and problem solving and processing, but there's also problem solving and building a relationship in the midst of an activity. It's very naturalistic and experiential and developmentally appropriate. And it's also different from the medical model. And so the medical model of mental health treatment is just very much focused on assessment, diagnosis, treatment, and it's very deficit oriented, and it's totally focused on pathology. And so an outdoor adventure therapy approach is a strengths-based approach, because what we're doing is we're building skills, we're building capacity, and we're building relationships. And so it's like, okay, we all have pathology, and really diagnosis, I heard it once said, it's a narrative medicine approach, but a woman I heard speaking said, a diagnosis is a story. It's not a label or an identity. And so if we're talking also about underserved youth or youth of color who oftentimes, again, therapy is also not a safe space. Therapy is also for white people, right? Quote unquote, right? And so it's like, yeah, because it's been a vessel of oppression for communities of color. I mean, if you know the history of social work, good Lord, and our history of institutionalized racism and using the medical model to really keep people down And so for me, I'm interested in how the client is able to let go of the identity of being a client and becomes a full human being. Just like that kid that was the worst kid, right? You were connecting with their humanity and not their like rap sheet or whatever they had done. And so for me, nature and being outside and being active together or being inactive together gives us just chilling out in a hammock, but it gives us a time to co-regulate, to breathe together, to be together. And I get super excited about that. And I will also say that I love it. So as a teacher, you were probably really happy going outside of that building. You know, you doing your ecotherapy, it brings a smile to your face. Same thing with me. I get to rock climb and hike and do all these cool things with my clients/students and that's the selfish reason, I guess. But related to practitioner well-being, because we also know that vicarious trauma, if you are a helper, a teacher, a social worker, a nurse, a caregiver, you're absorbing the client's trauma. It's in your body. And so if you're practicing in an outdoor space, you're also getting to release some of that along with your clients, experiencing those health benefits. Yeah.
I think we've gone over this a little bit. I like listening to you talk about it. So, Starla, as somebody who works with students in environmental justice space, why do you feel it's important for youth to engage in outdoor activism?
Well, to be real cheesy, it's like the youth are our future. They're gonna save us. Anytime I see any young people talking like this, they are gonna save us. Please help us because we keep messing it up. I think that it's important because it should just be part of, it needs to be in activism and just working towards justice, equity, a better world, honoring the humanity in others, and letting people understand that this earth that we are so dependent on and that we have a relationship to is worth putting the effort into. And I think about youth too. I was thinking about my kids, right? They're in elementary school. One just graduated. She's about to be in middle school. And as much as we love nature, as much as we try to get them outside, there's still moments where they're like, don't make me go outside. But I think what's so important, besides the obvious answer of the only hope we have for our planet is to involve people at the very youngest age, is that the importance of developing connections to the earth, to land, to nature, to the nature within us, that is I think one of the most important things that we can do with youth so that they just care. And there's a reason, they're connected to what we are working to save. And that we also teach them the truth about disparity, systemic racism, environmental racism, that not everyone in Austin, which is such a beautiful city, has access to a pool or a natural spring or a park or, walkways to be able to cross the road safely. There's all these things that everyone deserves that everyone doesn't have. And that there's reasons why there's certain parts in certain neighborhoods that don't have the access. And in order to reverse that, you have to know the truth about it, right? So we have to be really honest with youth about why things are, and it's not just this individual like, oh, don't use a plastic straw, or it's so much bigger than that. I can go on and on. We have to be honest about the different ways, connecting at the individual level, the way that we interact with our environment, where we live, work, play, and pray, and also at the larger sort of systemic policy level, what's happening with big business, big companies who are really driving some of the climate change issues. So, it's important because we won't be here if we don't do it. And that people are getting disproportionately impacted by climate change. And so if people, I just going on, but I think I'm gonna wrap it up.
Can I add to it?
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to use a phrase that the founder of the place that I work at, Leifert Johnson, said, nature is where we all meet. And like that, like it's important to teach them this environmental justice stance because nature is not my nature, it's our nature. And like I said something to someone the other day about like your backyard only ends where your property line ends isn't necessarily true because everywhere is all of our backyards, and if there's no caring about what's happening to that, there's really no caring about what happens to the self. So like you said, connecting them to a bigger thing.
Yeah, New York City is really caring about Canada, right about right now, right? So, yeah, I like what you talked about there. And also, I recently saw a young African-American environmental activist, and she said she also got into it because it's not all doom and gloom. It's also what you can do about it.
Absolutely.
And bring some positivity to it.
Yeah, that's important.
So now, Christine and D'Amica, if you could talk a little bit about how do you help children determine the line between what's adventure and what is danger in the outdoors? Because there are dangerous things in the outdoors, and there are dangerous things to do. So what's that? How do you kind of speak about that line between danger and adventure?
We speak a lot about at the center about hazard and risk. That there are, we train teachers, or at least we try to train teachers to see in outdoor learning spaces that there are certain natural hazards, like sticks or things that might impale someone, like there's physical hazards of like maybe water, sharp rocks, things like that. And then there is risk, and risk can be hazards can be mitigated, like we had a teacher say something about the stumps because they don't want to put stumps down because the stumps fall over, and it's like, well, you can tie them together and mitigate that hazard, or you can shave down the sides of them and mitigate the kids scraping their knees on them. But you teach kids about risk and about taking risk and about taking appropriate risk and questioning them on like, is that really safe for you to climb that high in that tree? Like, where's the safety level? Because with outdoor learning environments, which is an initiative with the Department of Health and Human Safety to get kids outside, we talk about outdoor learning environments versus like playground equipment, and like what's the compliancy on outdoor learning spaces, because nobody can tell you how tall a tree can be, like it goes and climbs it, but they always tell you how tall your play platforms can be and things like that with structured play. So both of them have hazards, both of them have risk involved. So we talk to children a lot about, is this risky behavior worth whatever reward you're getting from it, kind of, with that, because we do a lot of outdoor play at the center as well. Like we have a thing called Portlandia, and we also have outdoor Fort Bills, and it's amazing to go out there and see what these kids build out of cedar posts and some tires and some cedar blocks that we have out there. That there's stuff that's out there different, but we got to keep down all the time because we're like, who let this kid go in the street? Their parents did, because they're the playground monitors at that point. But to see the things that they take risk on, even if it's, I'm going to walk across these boards just to see if they wobble or whatever. They might fall down, but we call those learning injuries. If they scrape their knee doing this low risk thing, they'll think about the high risk thing a little bit harder before they build it even higher and try to walk across it. So, risk and hazard.
I love that. I'm so glad I let you go first. I just learned so much. So I agree, and I think what you're talking about is we're providing young people with experiential education opportunities to learn judgment and decision making. We're also teaching young people how to really navigate their bodies in spaces. And if you know anything about trauma, it actually doesn't just affect our central nervous system and our bodies, it actually affects our sensory modulation system. So we don't always know, like, our perception of even like senses and things in our environment and our body and spaces is kind of sometimes a little off kilter if we have a trauma history. So getting that kind of free play space really helps kids learn to modulate that sensory input. The other thing I wanted to point out is, so I work with, I mean, again, like the term youth at risk, right, is like, has been so ubiquitous. I worked in juvenile justice with kids on probation who I loved. And so I would talk to them all the time about risk because they were champion risk takers. I mean, they had it down to an art form. The problem was they were taking really empty risks. So I would talk with them about the difference between an empty risk and a positive risk. A positive risk is something that's going to yield something in your future that is positive. It's going to open up new pathways for growth. An empty risk is going to close that door. An empty risk, the consequence is like, it's going to cut off future opportunities for growth. And I think young people get that. And I read a book years ago by Cynthia Lightfoot. It's called The Culture of Adolescent Risk-Taking. Because also, I'm going to borrow that phrase, what do you call it, a learning injury? Yeah. I love that. So I feel like I have those every day. I've got some learning injuries that have happened to me. Yeah, I'm totally going to use that. But I think it's true also in the space of social and emotional risks. We have learning injuries, right? Conflict, human conflict, like interpersonal conflict. We can walk away with some learning injuries, right? But we had better learn how to do human conflict a little more peaceably and with some focus on relationship building. So I like to really highlight that and not eradicate risk, but really provide opportunities for healthy risk-taking and decision-making and judgment. And then also focus the fact that when we set up these programs, you know, especially I'm talking to like Explore Austin, right? You all know you have the risks, the physical risks that kids are taking, whether they're mountain biking or rock climbing, but then you have those emotional risks that your kids might take to just even speak in front of the group, or to say, I feel scared, or I'm feeling judged, or I'm not feeling safe. Those risks to me are so much bigger and are definitely not empty risks. They're such positive risks. And so I see that all the time in an outdoor education and therapy space.
And so for each of you, what does the future hold for your respective organizations, and what are you excited about?
I think for us at the center, in education, because that's my purview. Being able to open up more opportunities for students to come out and learn about native plants and wildflowers is exciting for me. I met a young man the other day that started a nonprofit, and he came out to do some volunteer work for us because he wanted to know about the plants as well, and his nonprofit was focused on eradicating the American lawn. And I was like, how amazing is that? And I told him, I was like, none of our ancestors said, I want to own 2 acres of land and grow Bermuda grass, because it's just not productive. And he was like, yes, that's what it is. So I handed him a Ptolemy book and said, come back and see us. And just being able to do that, the excitement and his face was palpable. And we started something this summer with the teen camp, and everybody was kind of grumpy about, we're doing this for teenagers, and we didn't have a very good turnout for it. But once those kids came in with that energy of like, they really genuinely wanted to know about plants, and we have a bunch of plant nerds at the center, and they got jazzed about these kids wanting to know about plants. This week has been are we gonna do that again? So like that synergy that was created by these young people wanting to be in outdoor spaces was amazing, and that's what's really exciting for me, is to be able to create those opportunities.
Plant nerds and baby plant nerds.
That's wonderful. So I guess if I were to think of the organization I represent, it would be Texas State University School of Social Work, and I am delighted that they have, for the last probably 12 to 13 years, allowed me to teach a graduate elective in outdoor adventure therapy, one of my students here. And it is really a beautiful opportunity for me to then train and recruit and empower, I think, a new generation of mental health professionals and helpers and outdoor educators who really understand the importance of telling the truth about those barriers. Also, Texas State is a Hispanic serving institution, and so the students that I get to teach are largely a non-white group of students, and so I appreciate that because I feel like our field, the field of outdoor therapy, is still pretty white, and it really needs that. And so I feel like it's kind of my obligation and desire to help diversify the field and continue to train up new students in that. So that's an exciting ongoing thing for me.
Well, mine's very similar, being in a school of social work. I think I've been at UT since 2018, and I'm heavily involved in our field education program where all students are required to do internships both years. And we are getting more and more placements that are nature-based placements, camps, outdoor rec, environmental justice, and I think also just this sort of shift from the very clinical medical model, we're gonna sit in a chair, I'm gonna do CBT, even though it's been proven to not really, work and not work, but anyhow, it's what gets paid for. But I think that just sort of this shift away from, we're gonna heal alone in a room, with two people, and that's not what healing is, right? So I think it's kind of like, I'm just excited that there are so many more social workers who are all interested and connected to nature in different ways and are starting to connect the dots that, I don't have to be working, I can do this work in such a different way. And I'm just thinking about a student that I was supervising who was working at Travis County Correctional Facility, and she did an ecotherapy group with some of the people, and it was so impactful. So the way that we are being able to bring nature inside places and just get people to connect back as a form of healing is really beautiful and makes me really excited.
So you're talking about lots of placements and the like, perhaps you could start with this. So what organizations besides your own that focus on getting kids outdoors should the audience be looking to engage with or finding out more about?
Well, I am forever excited about Outdoor Afro. Outdoor Afro is not just an organization for children. It's for families, it's for individuals, it's for everyone. But Outdoor Afro was created, when did it start? Maybe 2009. But there's leaders in Austin, in San Antonio, in Dallas, and I had the privilege of being a leader for 2 years in Austin. And we did the most beautiful things. And I had little bitty kids, so everything I planned was kid friendly. I mean, we did everything. And so I'm forever just gonna tell people to check out Outdoor Afro, look at the work that they're doing. I really love El Ranchito. There's camps in general. I went to camp, so I'm very much a camp person, but in terms of environmental justice, Poder has a youth justice fellowship, and they are environmental justice and also the Indigenous Cultures Institute is amazing. They do a lot of beautiful work with youth. And also I want to mention, I'll have to come back, but those are the people off the top of my head.
There's this great group called Explore Austin. Okay. we already know that part, but I wanted to give a shout out at large to, a couple Austin organizations, Explore Austin and then Urban Roots is doing just amazing work with youth and farming, and also have a delicious CSA, like you can get little boxes of goodies. Also, the Texas Children in Nature Network, which is a really great broad consortium. Were you going to say that? You can say it again. I'll skip over. At Texas State University, we have the Meadows Center for the Environment, and we do, I think that they literally provide environmental education to 17,000 school children a year, but it was probably more. I probably got that wrong, and they're going to be mad at me, but it's a lot. And they're doing great things. You can go and take the glass bottom boat tours on the San Marcos River and learn about the history of indigenous culture in that area. And then on a national and international level, I am a lifelong member of the Association for Experiential Education. We have our Therapeutic Adventure Professional Group, which is kind of our subgroup of therapists and psychologists and social workers, that rec therapists who are really intentionally using nature and the outdoors, or I should say partnering with. See, even my language, that's like colonizing language. I'm just gonna own it. I'm gonna catch myself, because nature is not just a commodity or a resource, it is our kin, and we are part of it. So I'm partnering with Mother Nature. And so TAPG is about those that are doing that. And then I wanted to share this book, actually, because it's this shameless promotion. It's not my book, so it's not about me. This actually, any money for this goes to providing scholarships for the Association for Experiential Education, their conferences and trainings. But this book is Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Field Guide in the Outdoors. It's a collection of stories of people's experiences in nature and in the outdoor field, really looking at their experiences with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, or the lack thereof, to kind of elevate perspectives and enlarge really our sense of empathy, so that we can enlarge our sense of belonging for all people outside. And this is a project that was done in honor of Dr. Nina Roberts, who was an outdoor rec professor, an African-American woman at San Francisco State University, a leading scholar, and someone who really impacted the national park system and had a large role in diversifying the national park system. So get your copy. I'm excited about that. For me, just this national conversation happening. Like you said, there's Latino outdoors, there's Afro outdoors, there's an LGBTQ group for outdoors. It's just people finding safety through affinity. And then I heard at the panel that Explore Austin had, Thurman Hogan, who works for Black Outside, gave me a bit of wisdom. He said, it's not so much just like collaborating, it's also like white people being able to not be in charge. It was just great. So I'm gonna end with that.
I was just teasing. I saw it on your paper. Yes. She's gonna say Texas Children in Nature Network. And it feels like a shameless plug for me, because I am a board member for Texas Children in Nature Network. Our executive director is actually in the audience if you want to talk to her later. We have a mission that is focused on accessing outdoor, making equitable accession for outdoor spaces for all of Texas children. We have a conference that's happening in December as well, where our regional collaboratives get together and talk about the work that's being done. So our regional collaboratives are full of all of the organizations. So it's kind of like a shameless plug for all of the organizations that are a part of the Texas Children in Nature Network. And some of those that you have mentioned are a part of that network. And in the network, there's strength of seeing what your peers are doing, and also hearing what those barriers that we talked about earlier that are occurring for them, and how do we overcome those things together, and how do we create not only a network of organizations, but a network of places where people feel safe and belong, or in a belonging space where there's equity and inclusion for not only races or socioeconomic statuses, for all different ability levels in those spaces. Because last year's conference, we had a learning moment for me about how we have a community of visually impaired explorers that are taking people outside on bicycles and doing kayaking and things like that. So that's my shameless plug for my organization outside of Lady Ray Johnson Law Club.
I co-sign that.
Great, thank you everyone so much. How about a round of applause for